My guest is Dan Olmsted. I mentioned earlier in the program he is an investigative reporter, formerly a senior editor for UPI, a graduate of Yale, and a founding staff member of USA Today, where he served as an assistant national editor. And he writes about health and medicine regularly in the Washington Times, currently an editor of the Age of Autism website, which provides daily updates on the autism epidemic. The Columbia Journalism Review has called the site some of the most enterprising contributions to the autism debate. And he is also, along with colleague Mark Blaxell, the author of Age of Autism, Mercury, Medicine, and Man-Made Epidemics. Nice to have you with us today, Dan.
Thanks, Gary. Good to see you.
Dan,
over the phone.
Dan, a couple of items. A Stanford University School of Medicine study with twins claims that the genes only account for 38% of autism spectrum disorder risk, whereas 62% is due to environmental factors. Then the Environmental Working Group has come down on the failure of government and federal health agencies to deal with the rising exposure to children to mercury and toxic chemicals in our environment, from fossil fuels to coal burning. Would you please address the debate about aligning the whole autism debate, that it's strictly genetic and hence hereditary, and hence blaming the parents and saying no one's at fault and therefore not covering these people, versus looking honestly at what the reality of parents and children who've developed autism, who didn't have autism at the beginning of their life, or any of those who were developing normally until their exposure to environmental contaminations, including vaccines, and then they became autistic, and the government has refused up to this point, and the public health officials, to acknowledge this. Please take us on this journey.
Well, just to start off, it's beginning to feel like Groundhog Day in March every couple of years, because the CDC comes out with another round of terrifying figures on the autism rate and continues to say they don't know what's going on, but it can't be the environment, or it can't be vaccines in the environment, and whatever it is a big mystery. Yesterday they came out with a rate of 1 in 88 children who were born in the year 2000, so they're 12 years old now, have some kind of autism disorder. When you break that down, boys and girls, boys are much more likely to have autism, and you get a situation where in New Jersey, 1 in 28 boys, 12 years old now, has an autism diagnosis. And when I was in school, at least, the 28 was a typical number for a grade school class. So you're looking at just a very, very powerful figure there, and especially when you think that back 20 or 30 years ago it was like 1 in 2,500 or so children would have autism. Now it's somewhere around in the range of 1 in 100. That's a 25 times, not 25%, 25 times more common. It's horrifying, and what that has to mean to anybody who's looking at it with an open mind is that genes can only play a small role. They may predispose a child to having some problem with an environmental toxin. Maybe they can't get rid of the mercury, or maybe they're prone to autoimmune disorders because those run in their family. But really, ever since autism was first described in 1943, parents who are the victims have been the target of blame one way or the other. First, it was this really horrendous idea that mothers in particular were so cold, refrigerator parents, that they inspired this reaction in their child of withdrawing completely into this autistic self-imposed exile. In fact, Bruno Bettelheim wrote a book called The Empty Fortress as late as 1964, which was the orthodoxy that, the child had kind of disappeared under this onslaught of parental rage. It was nuts. That was succeeded by what seemed to be a gentler theory, which was that it had to be genetic if it wasn't caused by the parental behavior. And that, seemed for a time to be reasonable. But then what happened, as we know, again, is starting in the late 80s, there was this huge increase in the autism rate, and now you can parse it over. Is it part of it better diagnosis? Well, maybe some small part is. Is part of it a broadening to include Asperger's? Possibly, but this manifold increase clearly debunks any connection with genes as the driving force. What happened late last year was a study that came out of Stanford and actually the NIH, National Institutes of Health, that found that the studies that had pointed towards genes were really faulty. That in order to have a genetic disorder, essentially, if you had identical twins and one had it, then the other one would have to have it because it would be 100% genetic. And fraternal twins, the rate would be a lot less because they, although they're born from the same mother, their genetic material is no more common than another sibling. But what this study found was that the concordance rate of autism in identical twins was far lower than it had been described. Previous studies had said it was 95% concordance in identical twins. One had autism, so would the other. In fact, it was more like 43%. And, by the same token, fraternal twins had a higher rate of autism. So the whole thing just blew up. But we're still hearing this nonsense about genes and this denial of an epidemic.
Where do we go from here? What is the next step?
Well, Gary, I actually find myself thinking just how much longer can this cover-up of the truth continue? And I don't know the answer to that. I'm trying to make it as short as possible time before the truth comes out, and so are many other people who've been working at it a lot longer than I have with much more at stake, parents and families and advocacy groups. But we know that younger parents, younger doctors are, catching on to the fact that a lot of this is medically induced. A lot of it is vaccine induced. I mean, I know that's not popular to say in the mainstream, but it's the truth. And so, I think a generation of autocratic, paternalistic, Western allopathic doctors are going to have to get off the stage. And the same thing with a lot of journalism that has been so badly amiss in doing their job of talking to real people, talking to parents, talking to families, listening to these stories about what's happened. So, where do we go from here is just fight, do the right thing, possibly lose every war and every battle and win the war, like the Viet Cong. I mean, I don't want to compare myself to a fighting guerrilla army.
We understand the metaphor. Yeah. Well, Dan, again, I thank you for giving us this Newsmaker update. Sooner or later, we're going to have to appreciate how toxic the environment is. I believe that one of the reasons we have not been honest about the real causes of autism spectrum disorder is because we would then have to take an honest look at the pollutants in our environment, the chemicals in our food supply, all the pesticides, all of the industrial solvents that we allow today because we don't want to burden the manufacturers, the major political contributors, with having to clean up their mess. So if we simply say this is not a possible cause, then we're left with just genes, and we know that that is not the case. And so until such time that we have more progressive minds in positions of power to regulate properly, we're going to end up with this mess. The Age of Autism, Mercury, Medicine, and Man-Made Epidemics from St. Martin's Press. Dan, thank you very much for sharing this with us.
You bet, Gary. Best wishes.